welcome to this broadcast from Ramaskrik TV. Are we calling it that, Solveig?
I guess some kids working at the festival are the real Ramaskrik TV, so we're like...
Yeah, well, we're trying out this live stream thing where we're talking about movies, and hopefully people will find it interesting to watch. Today we are doing something a bit different. I think we have a lot of, or at least some viewers that are not Norwegian. So you probably are not quite familiar with what Ramaskrik is. What is Ramaskrik?
Ramaskrik is Norway's largest horror film festival. We have a festival in the middle of October every year, and this year it's our 10th festival.
Yeah.
It's highly recommended. If you want to see Norway and horror films at the same time, it's the best combo.
We're located in the mountains in a very small village. It's the perfect setting for a film festival. And Solveig, what do you do for the festival?
I watch tons of films. I work with programming together with a team, and I also do the booking of the films.
Yeah, and I also watch equal amount of films. Do programming, and I'm technically in charge of the festival. So, if you are interested in Ramaskrik, you can check out our Facebook page or our website. Yeah.
That's the commercials for today.
Yeah. Let's get on with the show. Today we're talking about Stephen King and his books, short stories, films,
series, everything.
Yeah.
Geeking out.
And to help us do that, we have some guests with us. First, we have a Norwegian director who is, you might know from his films Trollhunter and Autopsy of Jane Doe. Last year, he had both Mortal and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. So we're pleased to introduce Mr. ANDRÈ ØVREDAL.
Hey.
Hello. Hi.
Hey.
How are you doing?
Very good. Nice to be on this. It's a fun thing you guys are doing here.
Thank you. Hopefully people will find it interesting.
Yeah.
And since we're talking about Stephen King, why have we invited you?
Well, I assume it's because of the long walk.
Indeed.
Yeah. Which, of course, I'm hoping to direct at some point when this virus will let us.
Yeah.
That's
so something to look forward to, I'm sure.
yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. And also with us, director from Los Angeles, and the reason we're talking English today is a director who has done lots of Stephen King movies, TV series, and TV films. He directed the series The Stand, TV series of The Shining. He did Sleepwalkers, and he's done pretty much everything. Please welcome Mr. Mick Garris.
Thank you.
Hi.
It's an honor to be here, the token American. And by the way, about ANDRÈ, of whom I'm a huge fan, the long walk is the one thing whenever I meet someone, everybody always goes, what do you think about making the long walk? You should make the long walk. And Stephen King wrote that when he was 19 years old, and people have been wanting to make it into a movie since, and it's in very good hands.
Well, thank you. That's fantastic coming from you. No, I mean, it's an amazing book. It's an amazing story. And yes, he wrote it when he was basically a teenager. It's unbelievable. The maturity of the writing and the characters and understanding of the world is way beyond his years.
Was that the first book he wrote?
Yes.
It wasn't a full-length book. It was pretty much a novella.
Okay.
But yeah, it was pretty powerful and potent, and like ANDRÈ says, so amazing that a 19-year-old kid wrote that thing.
And what do you think the reason it hasn't been made into a film or a movie yet?
Well, Mick?
No, take it, Andre. You were the custodian of this one.
I think people have tried a couple of times.
Well, kind of. I mean, I know Frank Darabont was supposed to do a movie of it for years, and somehow it didn't actually materialize. And then at some point, he let the rights expire, and basically the team I'm working with now took it over, and they eventually invited me in. I don't know how many others have actually tried before Frank Darabont, but obviously that version would have been an amazing version as well. I mean, my God.
So yeah, you both are Stephen King fans, I've heard.
Yeah, sort of.
So, yeah. I'm always interested in hearing how things started. So André, what was your first encounter with Stephen King and his universe?
I mean, my aunt gave me Pet Sematary when I was way too young to read it. And I was like lying in my bed reading it, and it was terrifying, absolutely beyond. It's one of those moments or experiences where you really look under the bed and you're living in darkness. And I read it again and again, and I just to scare myself. It was such an amazing, terrifying tale. And I totally fell in love with that. And then that I read in Norwegian. And then I started buying all his books in English. And I remember going on a vacation with my parents to Majorca. And all I did the whole week we were there was sit in my room and read one book a day. I literally read one book a day for the whole week. So I went through Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, Mystery, and, all those... and I just the world and the way he tells stories is just so amazing. So that was my initial blast of Stephen King.
That sounds perfect, and I can relate as well. It's my first experience wasn't that intense, not maybe one book a day, but very similar in other ways. How about you, Mick?
Well, as I'm the one gray-haired member of this group, I actually read his books as they came out. So I did not read Carrie. I didn't know nobody knew about Stephen King until the movie Carrie came out. The book had not been a bestseller or anything. I saw the movie, was blown away by it. And so the next book was The Shining. And that was the first one I'd read. And I still think this is the best horror novel and one of the best novels I've ever read in my life. It's so human and deep and painful and personal. And it was doing horror in such a way that we connected with it on a personal level that was not really a part of literary horror in the 1970s. So I was a very young man in 1979 when the book came out, and it completely opened my eyes to a new author who I religiously read from there on. I
think you're lucky who got an early start. For me, it seems impossible to read all the books, but that's sort of a good thing as well, because I'll never run out.
Yes, you have a long life ahead of you.
Yeah, and I guess I think he's going to live forever and keep writing for as long as I live.
Yeah, well, so, there was a period where he tried to quit writing, and writing is like breathing for Stephen King, and I just he couldn't last very long without the oxygen of the keyboard in front of him, and so he kind of gave it up for about 6 or 8 months, and then here comes a new Stephen King book.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad. Torbjørn,
yeah,
how did you get into Stephen King, or did you?
I'm one of the few. I'm the guy here who didn't really get into Stephen King's books. I've actually not read a single book of his. I've seen. I know.
I'm leaving this broadcast.
And there's really no reason for it. It's not like a choice. It just, I don't know. I've seen a lot of the films and TV series, and I'm not sure why I haven't read his books. It's an interesting flaw in my character, I guess.
If you do, you'll get hooked.
Yeah, probably. So I think I might pick up a few. And what would you recommend the first book to be?
Well, for me, it would be The Shining.
Yeah.
That's a good entry drug.
Yeah, that was my, well, I was about to say that was my entry film, but that's not true. I think actually I saw Carrie before I saw The Shining. And I've seen so many of the films, and they got me hooked, so I don't see why his books shouldn't. So
yeah, and I just read The Shining recently after being very familiar with the film and the story, and that didn't matter.
No.
Well, it's pretty well known that King does not really care much for the movie.
No, you don't.
Everything that was personal about that book, and it's an incredibly intensely personal book, was kind of cast aside in the Kubrick version.
Yeah.
So my first encounter with Stephen King, for me, he was just a name on a VHS cover in my dad's collection when I was a kid. And the cover was red and had lots of flames on it and was so scary. And I would not go nowhere near it. I was sure I wasn't allowed. And there was Sometimes They Come Back. And I still haven't seen it, but that was Stephen King, was a scary thing. But then I was 16 and my girlfriends were going to the beach and I went with them in my black clothes and black short hair. And I was a goth punk. So I stopped by a kiosk on the way and got the newest release of The Scary Man, Stephen King, which was then Dreamcatcher. And I found it wasn't all that scary, but I loved the stories and especially the characters. So that was very surprising for me. So
and you
the
may not know,
characters,
you may not know that you may not know in Europe that Sometimes They Come Back was made for television in the United States by Tom McLaughlin. And it was released theatrically elsewhere around the world in a widescreen print, but it was made for TV.
I think the film came out when I was around 6, so it was always just a scary cover. But yeah, Stephen King's characters I love them. I think he writes so interesting people. Do you have any favorite characters? It's not, you don't have to pick one. That's impossible.
A favorite character. I mean, obviously there are so many. I mean, Jack Torrance, Carrie. I mean, Carrie especially to me has always been a wonderful, I don't know, depiction of a specific life and specific characters. I don't know. I really loved her. Yeah.
There are so many, and Carrie is, I mean, it was the first one, and it was so amazing that this young man could write from the perspective of a young girl so intelligently and perceptively. And Mother Abigail from The Stand is a character not like any other I'd ever seen. And again, for him to get into the mind of a 104-year-old Black woman from the Midwest, it's pretty remarkable. And she's a really wonderful, beautifully drawn character. You know, it's an enormously Christian story, and I am enormously not Christian. But you don't take sides with it. You know, it's not about what your personal philosophy is. You buy into the magic of storytelling. And that's what's so great about that character. She feels real. I want some of that bread that she bakes, you know. She just seems to have so much richness and texture and reality to her.
Yeah, she's everything that's good in this world. Yes. But it's interesting that you both came up with some good characters, not some villains. So if I say villains.
Well, you said favorite characters, villains.
Yeah, yes.
We're not on the villains. Yeah, I mean, Randall Flagg, not only in The Stand, but he's in a lot of the Dark Tower books, and he is a recurring character. He's great. I mean, he is the walking dude. He's the devil personified in a guy in blue jeans and just a Pendleton shirt and boots, and he's out there, and he represents the bad side, but with charm. The devil would charm you, and that's exactly what Randall Flagg is, and the personification of him is so nasty and yet slimily real. He reminds me of politician active now somehow.
Hmm.
To think. Yeah.
Name escapes you.
Yes, just a bit.
Yeah, Randolph, he's everywhere in so many books, and I found that fascinating when I first started realizing the Stephen King universe was actually some kind of universe.
Yeah, it was way before Marvel did it.
Yeah. How about you, André? Do you have some favorite bad guys?
Well, I guess Annie Wilkes, wasn't that her name in Misery? She's quite spectacular. Yeah, no, I mean, I found her to be an extremely vivid villain in both the book and the film. God, who else? Of course, Barlow, Salem Slot. It's great. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, The Shining. My God, Jack Torrance isn't a bad character either version. They're wonderful. So, yeah.
It's interesting about Jack Torrance because he's both hero and villain.
Yeah.
When he's overcome with the spirits, the wicked spirits within the Overlook Hotel, this guy we identify with and who's trying to do his best is overtaken, and he becomes the villain, and he becomes dangerous to his beautiful young son. You know, it's a pretty powerful combination of characteristics.
Yeah.
Isn't that also true about Carrie? That she's both sides, and also some of the other characters, I think.
Yeah, vengeance will drive you to great extremes in the case.
Like the father in Pet Sematary.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the flaw of humanity somehow. That seems to be a recurring theme.
Yeah, the fallibility of people, you know, nobody is all good or all evil. And there's a little bit of everything in us. And we're fallible. We're human beings. We're not automatons. And I think nobody has depicted that in a more convincing way than Stephen King.
I'm going to sometimes come with some questions from the audience. We have a question about, to you, Mick. How do you feel about the upcoming version of The Stand?
Curious. I'm dying to see it. They have 4 times the money that we had when we did it. You know, they're not being slavish to the book. King had written the screenplay for our miniseries. He wrote the final chapter of the new miniseries, which is a chapter that doesn't take place in the book at all. So I'm very curious. I think Josh Boone is a very talented guy. And I actually, unless I'm on the virtual cutting room floor, I have a non-speaking cameo in it.
Oh, that's great.
I'm kind of excited to see how it turns out. I'm always pulling for it to be good, you know.
And I also have a question for both of you. That's not actually King related, but still, if you can name any films that are not strictly horror genre that have frightened you as much as horror films.
Take it, Andre.
Oh, well, that's I'm sure there are some. I mean, you know, God, there's Funny Games is a really scary movie. Requiem for a Dream freaked me out. I remember that. It's not horror movies. There are actually several, but that requires a little bit more digging.
Yeah.
There are so many scary movies that are more. I mean, Michael Moore's documentaries are sometimes very scary. So, yeah.
For me, this one's kind of easy because just last night I watched Seven for the first time since it came out.
Yeah.
And it is fucking amazing. It's a really great and really nerve-wracking, frightening film. And I find the films that frighten me the most are not the ones that have rubber monsters and creatures and mythological vampires and werewolves and sewn together bodies, but the ones that started with Psycho, the charming man in the motel down the highway, is capable of such evil. So something that could actually happen that you make me believe is real. I don't know what happened.
Who's that?
It's weird.
Is there a ghost? I think there's a ghost in the chat.
Well, we are in Stephen King land.
Yeah.
Great job.
Yeah. And of course, hopefully there is a movie playing in my head that is not a horror movie, that is scary, and that's The Long Walk.
Yeah.
That's a terrifying movie.
So Mick has adapted tons of books into films and series, and ANDRÈ is hopefully going to. But if you can have your pick of a book to make it, or a story to make into a movie, a book or story by Stephen King, and there weren't any films that had already been made and therefore could stop you, what would you have on the top of your list?
Is there such a thing? Something that hasn't been made into a movie?
No, it can have been, but in this alternative universe, it hasn't. So nothing can stop you.
I mean, again, I'm going to have to go back to Pet Sematary, because it's a movie the book is so amazing. I thought the original movie was fun, but in my opinion, a bit flawed. It didn't have the tone of the book. I have not seen the latest remake, but it's even when I was a kid, even when I was a teenager, before I went to film school, I started shooting. I wrote my own script in a very simple way of Pet Sematary, and I built a whole Pet Sematary behind our house and started shooting. We shot 15 minutes of it, my own version of the book with my friends and classmates, and so I've already been like, that's the one I'm pushing for.
I want to see that.
Yeah, me too. Does it still exist somewhere?
It does, probably. It probably does somewhere.
I guess you could sell that for tons of money.
Like an Easter egg on an upcoming Blu-ray.
Yeah, please.
For me, I always wanted to do Gerald's Game from the day that I read it, and that was the day it came out. It's a movie that when you read it, you think it's impossible to make. And I really wanted to do it. It was very difficult at the time. Nobody was interested in doing it because of, I mean, really the whole story takes place on a bed with a naked woman handcuffed to that bed, trying to escape. Very difficult to turn it into a movie. Mike Flanagan did it very successfully for Netflix. He did a great job. But I always wanted to do that. Just the intensity of it is so extreme. You know, there's nothing really going on other than this woman who's trying to get out of the bed, out from underneath her dead husband on top of her. And we hear something outside that is another source of danger. And I always wanted to do something that was that adult in nature, and intense and enclosed. It's claustrophobic. 80% of it takes place in this bedroom, maybe 90%. And there was a period of time where I talked to King about it, and for a while he wanted to direct it and have me produce it, which would have been great as well. And that never worked out. But I'm delighted that one of the really good directors who understands King did it in Mike Flanagan.
He also did Dr. Sleep, right?
He did. He really knows. He knows the mind of Stephen King.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a question about how I think this is mostly for you, Mick. But when Stephen King is so good at describing his characters and scenes, very detailed, does that make it easier or harder to put the stories to the screen?
Well, it's both, because you have an idea of who you want to cast, but as ANDRÈ can attest to, when you're casting a movie, there are so many different elements as to whether or not you can get those actors. And what's really exciting is when somebody comes in who does it in a way you didn't expect, but is better than what you expected. I never imagined Steven Weber, who was a sitcom comedy actor to play Jack Torrance. And we went through all kinds of actors. Nobody wanted to take what Jack Nicholson had turned into an iconic role. We were 3 days away from shooting and still weren't able to cast it. I had never seen Weber's comedy series Wings. And so that was a good thing because I didn't have that expectation. And he came in, he was nowhere near what Jack Nicholson was. He made it entirely his own, much more warm performance in a very warm, you know, King is warm. Kubrick is a very cool and calculated filmmaker and, you know, a genius at what he did. This was not a great match of styles, this warm versus cold, because King is so human. And Weber brought a humanity to that and a strength to it in such a way that I never expected. Same thing with Matt Frewer doing Trash Can Man. You know, he's a lunatic in the book and in King's screenplay. And suddenly Matt Frewer, who's rooted in comedy and drama, brings in this intense humanity and sadness to the role of the Trash Can Man, giving it a dimension I never even imagined. So it's a great starting point to have these characters in mind, but it's also great to have the flexibility of bringing in actors that might not be who you expect in the part, but bring something in addition to what King grounded it in.
I have a question for André first. When you were asked to direct a Stephen King film, were you apprehensive at all? Did the notion scare you?
Well, yes, there is so much pressure to do that right. There is so much, it's such a weight of cultural history that lands upon your shoulders the moment you get a project like that. And with an author, you're basically your favorite author, period. So yes, there was a lot of apprehension, but not like I wanted to do it, and I was honored beyond my, beyond any imaginable future I could possibly have. I mean, what the hell? I'm being offered to direct a Stephen King movie. When did I ever think that was going to happen in my lifetime? That's yeah. Short answer is yes.
I want to talk about a moment that we in Ramaskrik remember well, because you came to see us in, I don't remember which year, but a few years back when the Autopsy of Jane Doe came out. And we had an amazing screening in the biggest screening room, and people were so happy with the film. And I don't remember
if I can interrupt, yeah.
Yeah. In my memory, this happened first, and then afterwards, Stephen King went online to tell everyone that he loved the film. And that was a big moment. It might have been the other way around. I don't remember, but I was... did it feel like to have Stephen King talk about your film?
I mean, it was insane. I remember sitting in a sofa at home and just showing my girlfriend how Twitter works. We were just like, oh, this is Twitter. And because she hadn't been on it, she hadn't used it before. And it's like suddenly up pops this, I mean, literally as we're doing it, up pops a retweet from James Wan. That's how I saw it. The Autopsy of Jane Doe, from Stephen King. And it's like, what the hell? Is this real? And yeah, it's, no, that was, that, and then a week later, Guillermo del Toro tweeted about Jane Doe. And it was like, okay, really? So between that week was a pretty good week, yeah.
Yeah. But you haven't met him personally yet, have you?
No.
Mick, I know you've met Stephen King several times. Do you want to talk about the first almost secret time you met him? Well,
the first time I met him was at a signing at a science fiction bookstore in Santa Monica long before I was a filmmaker. And I was just a fan in line. And he was there at that time. I remember he had a 6-pack of beer behind him that he brought with him. So this was before the AA turn. But the most memorable time meeting him was when we were shooting Sleepwalkers. I had not met him before we started shooting. We talked on the phone, and he would send pages, rewrite pages via fax to my office when we would discuss things that needed changing. But the day we met on the set was the day we shot the cameo scene with him and Tobe Hooper and Clive Barker all in the same shot. And the morning we were setting up, he was only going to be there for 2 hours. We had this very short window to shoot that sequence. And the morning we were setting up, I was eating my morning granola and I broke a tooth. And I had to be rushed down. I had to rush down to my dentist and get a temporary crown on. And I go, hurry up, Stephen King's gonna be here and I gotta shoot this scene. And it was so amazing. Here he comes in a sequence that he'd written, that I cast him in. He didn't write it for himself. I said, Steve, would you play this? And he likes to do that. It's really fun for him. But also because I introduced him to Tobe Hooper. Well, Tobe had done The Mangler, but I introduced him to Clive Barker. They had never met before. And King had given a blurb to Clive's books saying, I've met the future of horror and his name is Clive Barker. And so I was able to have all three of these guys together in one moment. And I felt like I was in horror nerd heaven.
Talking of Sleepwalkers, we have a question if there ever going to be a Sleepwalkers director's cut, and if so, what would the changes be?
Well, I doubt that there ever will be. There is a Shout Factory version that's great that has all kinds of extras and commentaries and the like, but it was all because the ratings board, the MPAA here in the United States, insisted on making cuts in order for us to get an R rating. There's the scene where you see in the mirror the sleepwalkers having sex, where he's feeding Mother her virgin source. That was a little more explicit. It was designed to be one shot where we start in the mirror, just showing the room. We go down to see the puddled floor, the puddled clothing at the base of the bed on the floor, pan up, see their feet, their legs, then their entire bodies as they're having sex, and end up on their faces and seeing in the background the mirror where they are reflected in their true sleepwalkers form. We had to cut around that. I wasn't going to shoot any other coverage, but fortunately I did, or they'd have just cut the entire sequence, or have abrupt cuts in it that cut to nothing else but time cuts. So I had protected myself. But there was that, you know, even something as stupid as when Dan Bradley, as the deputy, gets shot out in the cemetery where the car is. He's the guy who gets the pencil in the ear. Before that, he's shot. And they made us cut the gunshot that exploded his abdomen. There were a bunch of, we had to go back 5 times to get an R rating. And the studio wouldn't let me represent the film. They wanted to do it. They were afraid that I might lose my shit. But I'm way more civilized than that.
They had no problem with the incestuous relationship between the mother and son.
Not the relationship, but just the depiction of that incest. Now, I mean, a quick side story to that is the head of the studio, Frank Price, when we were about to start making the film, said, this studio is never going to have a film with a mother and son having sex as long as I'm in charge. Halfway through shooting, he was fired. So he was right. André, it's getting really dark where you are.
I know, it is. And I didn't really bring any lights.
The ghost of André ØVREDAL.
Yeah. I'll use my phone to light me up.
There you go.
That's scary stories to tell in the dark.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah, that's good.
That happens.
How do you both feel? Stephen King is often being seen as purely a horror writer, while he's written a lot of stuff that's not horror at all. Do you feel that's a bit unfair, or?
Andre?
I mean, unfair that he's being considered a horror writer.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, the thing
Because
is,
people tend to like don't look at his.
Well, his ability to blend drama, character, and a horror setting and a supernatural element is obviously some of his most amazing qualities. So sometimes he takes out the supernatural and you're left with amazing characters and storytelling, and it's like, okay, well, that's not so bad either. I mean, but the thing is, he's made a unique world for himself in horror that is unparalleled in history of anything. And it's just so in a way, he kind of, I don't know, he created himself in a way. He put himself in that box by being the best at it. That's scaring people. But no, I mean, of course, he's written amazing stuff, from novellas to Long Walk. My God, Shawshank, the Rita Hayworth. It's yeah.
Yeah, it's also, there's an incredible amount of snobbery, particularly in the literary world, against horror. It's considered the bastard stepchild of literature. And it's just like the term elevated horror is so offensive to me. It's just good horror. It's just not shitty. It's good. And I think to write something as human as what he did with The Shining or Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption, it takes a lot more to do great drama and humanity and add a layer of tension and suspense in books as well as in movies. And I really hate the snobbery about it. He achieved one of the highest recognitions an author can have is the National Writers Award, the National Book Award, NBA. And he received it, and there were a lot of snooty famous authors who really were pissed off that happened. And it's like, he did something new and special and created, as Andre said, his own subgenre of horror. But it's not just horror, it's literature. And horror literature goes back to the Bible. As long as there have been written stories, including on cave walls, where, saber-toothed tigers are killing cavemen, that is horror, and that is captivating, and that's what stories are about. And to even designate horror fiction versus fiction is the height of bigotry and arrogance.
Well said.
Let's light it up a notch thematically and talk about the summer. I guess lots of people listening, maybe some of them have read a lot of Stephen King books, but maybe we have some hidden gems or things most people haven't read that we can recommend for a good summer read. Any suggestions? I have one. I got a chance to think about this, so I can take the first one. I would like to talk about From a Buick 8. I'm the kind of person who I don't remember much of details or plot. I just remember the feeling of reading something. And for me, From a Buick 8 is a book I haven't heard much about from others. But it was a book I read in the summer, and it was light and fun and a monstrous car. And I think lots of people haven't read it.
I almost made it as a movie, but we never got it off the ground. I think, Rose Madder is a really fascinating book that not many people have read, and it's his first time writing in the first person in a woman's voice. And it's about, women being mistreated. It's a really important story that, again, he's able to wear the body of someone not similar to him and yet be so empathetic and so completely believable in conveying that voice. And it's just a really fascinating one. It's not one of the most popular books, but like you, Sylvie, I think it's something that I read that had an impact on me that will last a long time.
I haven't read it.
Now's
So
your
thank
chance.
you. Yeah.
And Lisi's story was the book he was most proud of, and probably his most literary book. And again, it's another woman's tale, and he's really good at that. And that was something that he was quite proud of having done, and it did not get the attention that it deserved to. It's not an out-and-out horror story, but it is horrific.
I think if I had to choose one author to read for the rest of my life, I would go with Stephen King, because he does so many different things, and there's a lot to choose from as well.
That's for sure. André, you need to get a still of this for your promotional publicity. This is really good.
Yeah, it's like dramatic lighting. Yeah,
Yeah. No,
it's getting darker, so I have to compensate. Yeah, there we go.
Another book I'm hoping to read this summer is a new book by Mick Garris.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it just came out this week.
Yeah.
And it's called These Evil Things We Do, the Mick Garris Collection. And it's a novel and 4 novellas. They are horrific, not all of them in supernatural ways. But something I'm really proud of. Not many people know of the written work that I've done that isn't for the screen. This collection is really something that, you know, in between movies, when you're actually just writing and there's nobody between you and your audience but the page, there's no budgets, there's no casting issues, there's no schedules, there's no, oh, we couldn't get him, but maybe he'll be as good. There's no studio executives, nothing between the artist and the audience except the work itself. And I'm really happy about it and excited that the Fangoria people have chosen to publish this as one of their first books. So it's out there now and available on Amazon.
Well, I'm going to order it. That's great. Yeah, that's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It's pretty exciting. It's like my 8th book, but nobody knows about the book.
That's amazing. Wow. I can't believe you have the time for all this. You're like everywhere, all over the world, and you get time to write books and make movies. And
I haven't made a movie in a while, but I'm eager to, we're hoping to cure that problem once everything opens up. And I can't wait for you. Are you going to hit the ground? Have you finished pre-production on your movie, André?
No, we were just about to start when, I was literally about to start. I was sitting in the middle of the night, ready to get on the plane. My suitcases were packed, and this was March 12th. And 1 a.m. in the morning, Norwegian time, my flight was leaving at 6 a.m. to LA to start prep. 1 a.m., Trump goes on and says, we're closing down the borders. And I was like, I called New Line. We talked for like an hour about what the hell do we do? And we decided there's no point in me coming. We just predicted basically what eventually turned out to happen.
That breaks my heart.
Yeah.
So, but hopefully we'll be gearing up again as soon as the world will allow it.
Yeah. Hopefully not too long.
Yeah.
But you're doing some other stuff as well later when you can. I heard there's a sequel coming for Scary Stories.
Yeah, we're working on that as well. Obviously, it's on the early script stage, but we're definitely working on that as well.
Yeah.
So that should be fun.
I've heard some people say that Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is a bit Stephen King-ish. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I think that Steven Spielberg and Stephen King share a lot of the same universe. It's about, small towns that we can all relate to. It's about humanity and people, and so is this. It's about going on a discovery journey in your own neighborhood in a way. And I think that's what all these are about. And I'm sure, and I know the writers, the Hagemans, they're obsessed with that kind of world themselves. So when I read the script, it was already in there. And you know, for sure, feeding from both Stephen King and Poltergeist and the Goonies and, you know, all this stuff into the, it's all, you know, as we make, as I'm sure you would probably agree with, is when we make a movie, it's everything we are that's coming out, in a way. And that's, so Stephen King has been a huge part of my horror upbringing. So I owe him, you know, a huge amount of whatever I do.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to, the first guy to hire me as a writer and second guy to hire me as a director was Steven Spielberg. So I only want to work with people named Steve. That's
we have another question for both of you. If you were ever offered a chance to remake Stand By Me, would you do it?
I think it's perfect. I don't think I could dare to do that. You know, doing The Shining was not a remake. It was going back to the original book of The Shining, and Stephen King wrote the screenplay, and it was a totally different beast. I think Stand By Me is as good as it could be. I think anybody who tries to top that would fuck it up.
Yeah. No, it's such a beautiful movie. The relationship between the kids and the way it's told, is the naivete of the shape of the film, and everything is just so, it's just a perfect movie. And all I can hope for is that I'll be able to bring just a percentage or two of that magic into The Long Walk. So.
And Mick, when you in the movies you've made, you have both had Stephen King write screenplays and be very active, and I guess some of them he has not been involved in. How different is that when you try to capture the book?
It's very different because, you know, he was there in the beginning. Everything came from his fertile mind from the very beginning. And when he's written it, when I read The Stand and The Shining miniseries scripts, they were amazing. But he developed a respect for screenwriting that he didn't used to have. He used to think that fiction writing was the real thing, and screenwriting was kind of a stepchild to that. But he developed a real respect for screenwriting with The Stand, and then on The Shining, that was the best script I'd ever read. Still remains way up there. But going back to the resource material, I've adapted myself, but on Riding the Bullet, it was only a 30-page short story, so there was a lot of flexibility to go. We only had half a movie there, and I even set it in a different time period that was much more personal to me, and total flexibility. Then Bag of Bones, I brought in a writer to do that. King had written the Desperation script as a feature, and then I did a rewrite to turn it into the 3-hour TV movie. So I approach it with total respect, but as King will tell you, books and movies are not the same thing, and they require a different muscle to make them. The writer Richard Matheson told me something when I was working with him on Amazing Stories that was really profound in its simplicity. He says, fiction is internal and film is external. And you have to master the tools of those two entirely different forms. They're both storytelling, but one is a passive watch. And when you read, it's much more active. You're more involved in creating the world inside your head that you're reading. But King writes in a very cinematic way, so it gives you a big head start on where you're going from his original material.
When we're talking about King's original scripts, I want to talk about a TV series that I've not read much about, not heard much about, but which became a favorite of mine when I saw it on TV one summer, of course, and that's Storm of the Century. Do you have you seen it?
I have not. No, I haven't.
I saw it.
Nobody's seen it. You saw it, yeah.
It was, at the time, King had talked to me about doing it, but I was involved in another project. And that miniseries was $40 million, hugely expensive, especially at that time. And it was an original, and it had a lot of really interesting stuff. They built massive sets in Toronto, or in Ontario. I think they were out of the city. But it's quite an accomplishment. But, you know, in a lot of ways, it's not as memorable because, you know, his work writing the script, as André can attest to, a good script doesn't necessarily mean the most captivating movie, because they are different media. Writing something onto a page and translating it into a visual sense. I think they did a good job of it, but I think he's done other, you know, Sleepwalkers was an original script, not based on a short story or book or anything. And so that's another time he did it. And Maximum Overdrive, of course, was based on trucks, but his only directorial attempt. Yeah, Storm of the Century is massive. That's the thing that I remember most about it, is what a big production it is.
I would recommend it if you have a hot summer night and just want something cold to watch.
Yes.
How about the Talisman, Mick? Would you ever adapt that?
I did.
You did?
I wrote a 4-hour, 2-part miniseries based on the book. It's one of my favorite scripts I ever wrote. Steven Spielberg was the producer, along with Stephen King and Kathy Kennedy and Frank Marshall. And with Kennedy and Marshall and Spielberg and King, and a way lesser extent myself, the above-the-line costs were so high and the production would have been so expensive. This was in the early days. It was several years ago, and we were going to do it, and many attempts have been made to do it. Ron Howard was going to do it later as a miniseries, or start with a feature film that turned into a miniseries. It just never happened, and it breaks my heart, because you know, I'm not as much into the fantasy side of Stephen King, the Black Towers and things like that. They're amazing, but the Talisman is such a grounded version of fantasy that it was one, like I said, one of my favorite things I ever wrote, and it breaks my heart that it just sits in a drawer somewhere.
Yeah, that's too bad.
André looks like he's about to introduce a horror TV series.
Yeah. I feel like it. I gotta lighten up, literally.
No, don't change it.
How do you think the horror movie world would be without any Stephen King adaptations? If you just took Stephen King out of the horror movies, how would the world be?
Well, we'd be losing out on a ton of great movies and TV shows, that's for sure. Oh my God, that's. It feels like it's like there is a humanity to his stories that would have been missing. The connection between drama and horror, actually teaching us who grew up making movies after his movies have already been existing for a bit. Teaching us how to make it work, the blend of drama and horror. That horror can be, well, you know, it's not, I do agree, elevated horror is not a good expression, but he does elevate horror in a way. It does, because there is a lot of cheap horror. There is no way around that. Horror is a very cheap genre to make movies in. You can get a lot of bang for your buck, basically, and a lot of people do that. And Jane Doe is definitely one of those, in a way.
No.
And no, but I mean, it's like it's a genre that is possible to create something really intense and suspenseful without any money. So it's very forgiving for young filmmakers, for starting out, and therefore there will be a lot of movies that don't quite work. And he's shown, I think, the whole world of cinema that horror can be amazing. It can be something that isn't as you say, it isn't horror. It's literature. It's movie literature. Yeah.
Yeah, I think horror would be much more superficial with if he had never been a part of the team.
Yeah.
So we have close to an hour actually. We have time is flying.
Wow.
I don't know. Do we have any final questions, Sylvie?
I think maybe there's something one of you want to ask the other. Now's your chance.
Yeah.
Can I read the Talisman?
Sure. Keep it to yourself. Yeah. I'll get it to you, Andre.
Send some Pet Cemetery footage in return.
Yeah.
I want to be one of the walkers in your film.
Yeah. Sounds great. Sounds like a good trade-off.
And I want to come to Ramos Creek.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yay! You do want to, yeah.
Yeah, it's a wonderful festival. You should really do it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm waiting for my invitation.
As soon as
no pressure, guys.
As soon as you're allowed to travel again.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm fearing that this year we'll have to stick with Norwegian guests.
Yeah. Oh, I understand completely.
Yeah. It's a shame though.
Well, this is great. It's so much fun to talk to somebody who's about to engage in the whole Stephen King thing and join the club.
I'm looking forward to it.
About that. We've gotten together at a couple of the Masters dinners and the like, but and doing the podcast is fun. But I'm eager to watch and see what you do, Andre. I'm really excited about it because you know how much I love your films.
Oh, thank you. No, I'm so excited to be making that film, and I'm honored to be able to chat with you every now and then. It's really such a pleasure.
For me as well. Yeah. And with the two of you from the festival.
Yeah.
It's been lovely talking to you.
Yeah, it has.
You guys too.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, guys.
No problem. And I was told after you should check out the video that was after the stream. It will be up on our Facebook page, and there are a lot of very nice comments from fans, and
that's fantastic.
That's great. So.
Okay. So I guess that's about it. I think we're about to do we are going to finish up. We don't have a new episode ready that we can tease with, but we'll be back with another film talk pretty soon, I guess. Yeah, just we'll go see it on our Facebook page when we have something.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you, and you have a good day, Mick, and Andre. Have a good night.
Get to bed, guys.
Yeah, it's starting to get very late.
Thank you so much for this. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Great chatting.
Take care, guys.
Great having you.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.